really happy to have with us next just a terrific HitLab partner, Linda Malek from Moses and Singer. We've been working with Linda for a number of years now, and as you all know, Moses and Singer is one of the leading law firms in the field of digital health, helping folks with everything from regulatory to intellectual property to just a number of other different elements in digital health. Linda, how are you today?
I'm great. Nice to see you, Stan.
Great. Excellent. And with us also is her colleague, Jason Johnson. Would love to start off and just have each of you just do a quick kind of 1-minute overview of your backgrounds for the audience.
Sure, I can start. I head up the healthcare and privacy and cybersecurity practices at Moses and Singer, and have been working in the digital health space for a number of years. We are big champions of digital health and emerging companies. We've tried to do a lot in supporting the growth of these companies, particularly in the New York area, but around the country. And we're excited to be here.
Fantastic. And Jason?
Hi, Jason Johnson. I'm a partner at Moses and Singer. I'm also in the healthcare and privacy and cybersecurity group, along with the IP group. Before I got into the healthcare regulatory side, I was a patent litigator, working mainly on Hatch-Waxman litigations and biologics. But nowadays, like Linda said, we do a lot of work with digital health and telehealth and telemedicine companies, particularly in the startup, helping them understand really the regulatory ins and outs so they can establish themselves appropriately upfront and avoid issues on the back end, which is where a lot of folks usually run into trouble.
Yeah, I think, just given the extensive amount of work that has been done at HitLab, certainly over the last 22 years in digital health efficacy testing and digital health technology testing in this emerging area, starting with websites and whatnot, legal issues are always front and center with these organizations. Now that there's a digital health center at the FDA, the regulatory, the privacy, the intellectual property. There are so many different areas that these founders and these startups executives are looking at. From your perspectives, what have been some of the more significant hurdles that you've seen that have been limiting the expansion of telehealth, particularly before the pandemic?
Yeah, I can start off with that. So, I think, like you mentioned, there's a lot of regulatory issues that come into play here. And it's not only federal regulatory, but it's also state regulatory. Physicians are licensed at the state level. And so if you're a physician licensed currently in one state, say New York, generally speaking, if you're not licensed in New Jersey, you're not allowed to go and see patients in New Jersey. So first and foremost, there's this sort of state-specific requirement that you have to meet to be able to work across state lines. In addition, historically, there hasn't been a lot of parity in reimbursement when it comes to telehealth visits versus in-person visits. I think, as Linda is going to mention, that some of that is changing during the pandemic, but obviously most of these folks are in the business of being a business, right? And so you have to look at the economic factor of this. And so if you're not getting significant reimbursement or parity in reimbursement on the telehealth side, then chances are you're going to probably not put as much effort into that. In addition, what has happened is that there have been CMS reimbursement, really I would call arcane CMS reimbursement rules related to how you could even get reimbursed from CMS. As it currently stands, if I as an individual want to go see someone that's going to be reimbursed under CMS for a telehealth visit, I can't do it from my home. I actually physically have to go to another doctor's office to speak with another doctor via a telehealth platform. So that obviously creates barriers on the patient side. And those types of barriers, really interfere with the provision of telehealth because, particularly during the pandemic, no one really wants to leave their house. And finally, there is the issue of how are you actually connecting, right? What services do you have? And so there is this idea of, medical deserts, right, where it's really difficult and challenging for individuals to access either the internet or platforms to even be able to reliably reach out to a physician to interact with them. And so, combined and coupled together, there's been, not a lot of momentum that's really pushed telehealth forward. But obviously with the pandemic, that changed significantly. And, you saw a significant increase in the number of folks that were using telehealth, particularly with the numbers that CMS put out.
That's great. And Linda, what's your perspective on the same topic, on the same issue?
Well, I would agree with Jason on that. I think, during the pandemic, there were a number of things that the federal government did to try to really expand access, and they really stepped up. At the beginning of the pandemic, HHS enacted laws and enacted rules around expanding coverage for telehealth visits in a way that we had not seen before, and also expanded reimbursement for telehealth in a way that we had not seen before. 41 states adopted waivers allowing for telehealth visits that were really, I think, sort of revolutionary in terms of what we've seen in the past with respect to telehealth. And Congress passed laws that preempted any state laws that were inconsistent. So I think what we have in the midst of this pandemic is increased access through regulation, through legislation at the federal and state levels, to try to allow for much more access in these medical deserts that Jason is talking about, but also in urban areas, because even in the context of urban areas, as we saw here in New York, we were in a position where it was very difficult to get to a doctor. And so I think those were significant solutions to some of the hurdles that had existed before with respect to telehealth, as well as increased funding to try to promote adoption of telehealth during the pandemic.
That's great. And Linda, how did these issues get addressed during the pandemic? I mean, I think you're addressing some of them, but obviously, with what happened starting kind of March, April last year, and now even today with some of what we're seeing, what are some of the major issues some of the major tactics people are deploying to address this?
Well, so to get a little bit more specific, for example, one of the big concerns was, what platform do you use? And is it secure? So what we saw was that the Office of Civil Rights enacted rules where they said, we're going to engage in discretion. We're going to use our discretion in terms of enforcement. So if you as a provider are acting in good faith, and you're using a platform that's really not intended to be a public-facing platform, but a private-facing one like Zoom or others, then we'll take that, and we will not enforce against you if you're using it in good faith and there happens to be a breach. And so I think what we've seen in the pandemic is an effort on the part of these federal regulators to accommodate what is happening in real life, and doing it pretty quickly and in a nimble way, which is not necessarily what we're used to seeing in terms of the federal government.
And Jason, are you seeing the same thing as well from your side of the practice?
Yeah, and I think from the going back to the state perspective, right? Because we have to look at both state and federal. A lot of what has been going on is that on the state level is that there have been executive orders, right? So there have been temporary suspensions of licensure requirements and other requirements that are in place for particular laws and regulations. And so, I think the bigger question is going to be that some of this is so temporary. What is going to stick, and what do people want to keep, and how the state legislature is really going to address this. Are they going to pass laws, or are they going to put it into the hands of regulators to come up with other regulations and ways to address these? But I think, particularly at the state level, there seems to be, the addressing these licensure issues really on the executive order. And then for reimbursement, it seems that, particularly for things like COVID testing and things like that, the states have really stepped up to ensure that reimbursement is being provided through both either federal funds or state funds to make sure that folks are getting reimbursed appropriately.
Yeah, and I think, what we're seeing now is with the variants of COVID, and it really has become like this numeric soup. We've got 1537, we've got 1356, we've 484, we've got N007Y or something. I've lost track of this. I'm getting flashbacks of organic chemistry sophomore year of college. But it is becoming this numeric soup of variants that we're seeing every day on the news. And this is seeming to be that this is a new endemic America that we're going to be living in. There's going to be the flu. We get shots for that every year. But now there's going to be this new super flu that we're going to be dealing with, where we're going to have to get a booster shot to whatever we picked up from 2021. Linda, tell us a little bit about these structures, infrastructure, as well as these policy structures that have been rapidly evolving over the last year. How are they going to continue to develop over the next few years?
Well, I think that post-pandemic, some of the things that we have seen in terms of innovation are probably going to persist because there have been improvements. And I think to Jason's earlier point, reimbursement is a critical part of this, because in order for these various platforms, various types of innovations with respect to healthcare delivery to continue post-pandemic, they need to be reimbursed. And what we're seeing is that CMS has already taken steps to reimburse for things for different types of visits in the telehealth context, for example, on the Medicare side, that are likely going to be adopted by private insurers, because that's typically how it goes. CMS will take the lead, private insurers will follow. And so when you have reimbursement, then that paves the way for a lot more possibility in terms of innovation. And so I think that because of that, and because of the relaxation of some of these rules and what we have seen in the way of positive impact, those things will continue post-pandemic. And so we'll see that over the course of the coming years, so that healthcare delivery will have, I think, a much more broad and enhanced ability to reach more people through these digital platforms.
Yeah, that certainly seems, hopefully that's going to happen. Jason, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think you're already seeing both at the federal and state level this being addressed. At the federal level, there are already bills in place that want to change some of those arcane CMS rules that I mentioned. Noting to the fact that you mentioned, Stan, there's also very specific bills that deal with, say, nursing homes, where the pandemic was really striking hard, as well as continued increase for the amount of funds for the FTC to hand out when we're talking about these medical deserts, and making sure that there's enough infrastructure to allow people to get the access that they need when they want it. And at the state level, there are certain states that have already proposed bills on a similar issues related to licensure. Arizona, for example, has a very comprehensive bill that really has tried to open up, telehealth availability for its citizens. And so it's addressed a lot of the issues that have come up during the pandemic. So, for example, if you just want to speak with your provider over the phone instead of Zoom, right? Before, that wasn't really allowed out of the telehealth stuff. Payment parity that we talked about, and the reimbursement that Linda mentioned, and also the allowance of folks that are licensed in one state to practice in Arizona. So I think certainly there is already momentum and some bills in place that are going to try to make some of these changes permanent.
No, that's great to hear. And Linda, we have a few minutes. We have 2 minutes left, actually, and I know time flies when you're having fun. But you guys are really sage. The advice is phenomenal, and the perspectives, even over the last 50 minutes, have been amazing. Linda, tell us what you think about that when you think about this, and when you think about what you advise companies who are just entering this space now. A lot of folks that are listening to this program live around the world or whatever, they're thinking about it. There's some investors, there are some startups that have just kind of entered the fray here. What advice would you give them if they're entering it and thinking about entering digital health?
A few things, and I'll try to make it brief, but I think that what we're seeing is a much, much more collaborative model and opportunities for collaboration. With that, though, comes the importance of making sure if you're an investor or if you're an entity that is thinking about partnering with the digital health company, there's going to be a lot of vetting to make sure that the company itself that's providing these platforms and that is providing these technologies is compliant with the various laws. Because even though there has been a relaxation of laws, there has not been a total abandonment of enforcement. And in fact, what we have seen in the last few months is a lot of enforcement around telehealth fraud, for example. So enforcement's still a thing, and it's an important thing. So vetting is going to be an important piece of the puzzle here. So whether you're a digital health company or whether you're partnering with a digital health company, ensuring that you're compliant and that you've really lined things up in a compliant way is going to be important.
That's really absolutely phenomenal advice. And with that, thank you both tremendously for your again, your words of wisdom and really helping lead this digital health ecosystem into a new type of healthcare delivery in the United States that we've never seen before. We envisioned it maybe by 2030 or sometime then, but now is affecting us now and today. Thank you both, Linda and Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stan.